I can tell you're not from around here, Vivian continued, her voice gaining confidence as she mistook Zara's stillness for defeat. I can tell you're probably very sweet, but you're in over your head. These prices aren't for people like, well, people in your situation. I'm just saying, Vivian pressed on, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of those chain stores in the mall. They have very nice pieces there, much more appropriate for your budget. The final word dropped between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the watching customers. An elderly woman near the pearl display actually gasped. The young couple exchanged horrified glances. Zara stood in the spreading silence, feeling the weight of every ancestor who'd been denied dignity, every pioneer who'd been told they didn't belong, every dreamer who'd been instructed to know their place. She felt the strength they'd passed down through generations, the quiet power that had carried her family from survival to success. Hi, my beautiful family. Let me begin with a prayer straight from the heart. Dear God, please bless every soul watching this video. Fill their lives with peace, joy, and endless love. Amen. Welcome back, my family. You are not just viewers. You are my light during the dark days, and my reason to keep going. To all new family members, welcome to the family. Please subscribe to the channel and introduce yourself in the comments. I truly want to know more about you. My beloved family, every story I bring is not just words, it is my sweat, my sleepless nights, and my sacrifice. When you leave early, it cuts deep as if my hard work is unseen and my voice unheard. Please stay till the end. I love you. Now let's begin the story. The late afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of sterling fine jewelry, casting rainbow prisms across cases filled with diamonds that cost more than most people's homes. Zara Rivera adjusted the strap of her worn leather purse and stepped inside, the soft chime of the door announcement seeming to echo longer than it should. She'd chosen this store carefully. Not the most expensive in the city, but elegant enough for what she had in mind. Tomorrow marked 5 years since Jonathan had proposed. Not their wedding anniversary, but the anniversary of that perfect moment when he'd gotten down on one knee in their favorite bookstore cafe, voice shaking as he asked her to marry him despite knowing the world would have opinions about their union. Zara's fingers traced the simple platinum band on her ring finger, remembering how her hands had trembled that day. Not from nerves about saying yes. She'd known her answer since their second date, but from the weight of what loving Jonathan meant. The scrutiny, the whispers, the way people looked at them like they were solving a complex equation instead of simply seeing two people in love. She dressed down today deliberately. Dark jeans, a soft ivory sweater Jonathan had surprised her with last winter, and her faithful leather bag, a gift from her grandmother when she'd passed the bar exam. She knew the game by now. Walk into a place like this looking too polished, and they'd assume she was overcompensating. Walk in looking too casual, and they'd assume she was lost. There was no winning, so she'd stopped trying to play their rules. What do you think? Should love be enough to overcome society's expectations? Or do couples like Zara and Jonathan face challenges the rest of us can't imagine? Share your thoughts below. 3 cases away, Vivian Chambers watched the young woman enter her territory with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent 45 years making instant judgments about people's worth. Vivian had managed sterling fine jewelry for nearly a decade, and in that time, she'd developed what she called her professional intuition about customers. She could distinguish between serious buyers and window shoppers, between people with real money and those just pretending. This one was clearly pretending. Vivian smoothed her auburn hair, now streaked with silver she refused to hide, and straightened her charcoal suit jacket, the armor that made her feel competent and in control. She'd fought her way up from part-time sales to store manager without a college degree, without family connections, without any advantages except sheer determination and an unwillingness to accept defeat. Her divorce from Thomas had been finalized 18 months ago, ending 22 years of marriage to a man who'd decided she'd become too focused on work and lost her feminine softness. He'd traded her in for his dental hygienist, a bubbly 28-year-old who giggled at his jokes and made him feel young again. The settlement had left Vivian with a modest condo and a fierce need to prove she was still valuable, still powerful, still somebody who mattered. She observed the woman, probably in her early 30s, moving deliberately through the store, pausing at the anniversary collection. Vivian's mouth tightened. Another social media princess, no doubt, planning some elaborate photo shoot to fake a lifestyle she couldn't afford. These types were becoming more common, thinking they could waltz into establishments like Sterling and act like they belonged. The afternoon light illuminated the woman's profile, and Vivian grudgingly acknowledged she was beautiful in that natural, unforced way that had always made Vivian feel inadequate. Elegant bone structure, hair pulled back in a classic chignon, skin that seemed to glow with health and contentment. Vivian's hand went automatically to her own neck, feeling the skin that no amount of expensive cream could quite restore to its former firmness. The woman's wedding ring sparkled as she leaned forward to examine a display, and Vivian felt that familiar stab of resentment. Of course she was married, probably to some entertainer or tech startup owner who'd gotten lucky and now thought money could purchase respect and acceptance. Vivian had seen it countless times, people trying to buy their way into circles where they fundamentally didn't fit. She squared her shoulders and began her approach. Time to exercise the authority she'd earned through years of dedication and sacrifice. Vivian Chambers might have lost her husband and her illusions about marriage, but she still commanded respect here. She still had power in this space. Zara felt the attention before she heard the footsteps. There was a particular energy that accompanied someone who'd already reached conclusions about your character, a barely masked antagonism that made the atmosphere feel charged. She'd encountered it in courtrooms, at Jonathan's tech conferences, even sometimes in the bookstore cafe where they'd gotten engaged. It was the sensation of being perpetually judged for existing while different. She kept her focus on the display case, admiring an understated tennis bracelet that would pair beautifully with the pendant Jonathan had given her on their wedding day. Clean lines, timeless design, enduring beauty, like their relationship when the world wasn't scrutinizing it. "May I assist you today?" The voice behind her carried artificial warmth layered over unmistakable condescension. Zara turned gradually, meeting the steel-grey eyes of a woman who seemed to be mentally inventory every detail of her presence. The woman's smile was professionally perfect and emotionally vacant. "Yes, I'm shopping for an anniversary gift for my husband," Zara replied calmly, her legal training helping her maintain composure despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "Something to commemorate 5 wonderful years." The woman's smile contracted almost imperceptibly. "Of course. And what investment level were you considering?" The phrasing wasn't inherently problematic. Any competent salesperson would inquire about budget. But something in her delivery, the way her gaze swept over Zara's carefully chosen casual attire, transformed a reasonable question into a challenge. Zara felt the familiar burden descending, the weariness of constantly having to validate her right to occupy space. She thought of Jonathan, probably deep in strategic meetings at this moment, completely unaware that his wife was once again being treated like an unwelcome intruder in her own life. "I'd like to explore your options," she said evenly, refusing to quote figures that would be deemed either laughably inadequate or suspiciously excessive. Something with personal significance. The woman, her nameplate read Vivian Chambers, store manager, adopted the patronizing expression of someone explaining elementary concepts to someone slow to understand. "Well, significance is quite subjective," Vivian observed, her tone heavy with implication. "Perhaps you might find our more practical selections better suited to your needs?" There it was, the moment Zara had simultaneously anticipated and hoped to avoid. The instant when courtesy would dissolve and reality would emerge, raw and unforgiving. The words hung in the air between them, like a gauntlet thrown down. Zara felt the familiar fire kindle in her chest. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper. The quiet flame that had sustained her through law school when professors questioned her merit, through job interviews where she had to be twice as qualified for half the consideration, through dinner parties where Jonathan's colleagues' wives smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. Practical selections, Zara repeated slowly, tasting each syllable. She turned fully to face Vivian now, her posture straight but relaxed, a stance she'd perfected in courtrooms when opposing counsel tried to rattle her. "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" Vivian's smile widened, the predatory gleam of someone who thought they'd found easy prey. She gestured vaguely toward a corner display case. "Oh, costume jewelry, fashion pieces. Lovely items that look expensive, but won't break the bank. Perfect for special occasions when you want to feel dressed up." The condescension dripped from every word like honey laced with poison. Other customers in the store began to notice the exchange, conversations dropping to whispers as heads turned discreetly in their direction. Zara's wedding ring caught the light again as she clasped her hands together. 5 carats of flawless diamonds surrounded by smaller stones, custom designed by Jonathan himself when his tech startup went public. She tried to talk him out of something so extravagant, but he'd insisted she deserved everything beautiful the world had to offer. "I see," Zara said quietly. "And what makes you assume I'd be interested in costume jewelry? Have you ever been in a situation where someone made assumptions about what you could afford? How did you handle it? Let us know in the comments." Vivian's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Honey, I've been in retail for 20 years. I can spot someone's budget from across the room. It's not personal, it's just business sense. I'm trying to save us both some embarrassment." The word embarrassment hit like a slap. Zara felt something shift inside her chest, a tectonic plate of patience finally reaching its breaking point. Around them, the store seemed to hold its breath. A young couple at the engagement ring section had stopped pretending not to listen. An elderly man selecting a gift for his wife watched from behind his designer glasses. "Embarrassment," Zara repeated, her lawyer's voice emerging, calm, precise, deadly. "For whom exactly?" Vivian stepped closer, emboldened by what she mistook for submission. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you walk in here wearing..." She gestured dismissively at Zara's outfit, discount store clothes, carrying a knockoff bag, and you want to look at pieces that cost more than some people make in a year. "I'm just being realistic." The accusation about her grandmother's bag, carefully maintained, lovingly carried for 8 years, struck deeper than Vivian could have known. That bag had been with Zara through every major milestone. Bar exam, first job, meeting Jonathan, their wedding. It held more value than anything in this store, but not the kind Vivian could recognize. "Knock off," Zara said, her voice so soft now that Vivian had to lean in to hear her. "That's interesting. Tell me, what else can you determine just by looking at me?" Warning bells should have been ringing in Vivian's head. Any experienced salesperson would have recognized the dangerous quiet in Zara's tone, the way she'd gone perfectly still. But Vivian was intoxicated by her own perceived power, drunk on the opportunity to put someone in their place for once. "I can tell you're not from around here," Vivian continued, her voice gaining confidence as she mistook Zara's stillness for defeat. "I can tell you're probably very sweet, but you're in over your head. These prices aren't for people like, well, people in your situation. My situation. Now don't take offense. I'm sure you work very hard. But there's a difference between working hard and being able to afford pieces like these." Vivian gestured grandly at the display cases around them. "These are investment pieces. Generational wealth. The kind of jewelry that gets passed down in families that have been building wealth for decades." The implication hung heavy in the perfumed air of the store. "You don't belong here. Your family doesn't belong here. Your kind doesn't belong here. Zara felt something crystallize inside her chest, sharp and bright, and absolutely unforgiving. She thought of her grandmother, who'd cleaned houses to put Zara's mother through school. Of her mother, who'd worked double shifts as a nurse to send Zara to college. Of generations of women who'd sacrificed and struggled and dreamed of a day when their children wouldn't have to prove their worth to people like Vivian Chambers. Generational wealth, Zara said, and now there was something in her voice that made Vivian take an involuntary step back. How fascinating. Tell me more about what you think you know about my family's history. But Vivian was past the point of wisdom, past the moment where she could have retreated with dignity intact. She'd committed to this path, and pride demanded she see it through to whatever end awaited. I'm just saying, Vivian pressed on, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. Maybe you'd be more comfortable at one of those chain stores in the mall. They have very nice pieces there, much more appropriate for your budget. The final word dropped between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the watching customers. An elderly woman near the pearl display actually gasped. The young couple exchanged horrified glances. Zara stood in the spreading silence, feeling the weight of every ancestor who'd been denied dignity, every pioneer who'd been told they didn't belong, every dreamer who'd been instructed to know their place. She felt the strength they'd passed down through generations, the quiet power that had carried her family from survival to success. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd never needed to raise it to command a room. I see. And if I were to tell you that I'd like to purchase that tennis bracelet, the one marked at $45,000, would you be able to complete that transaction? Or would my situation prevent such a sale? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vivian's face. But she was too deep in now to turn back. Well, we'd need to discuss payment options, Vivian said stiffly. Perhaps a payment plan, or cash, Zara said simply. Would cash work for you? The word cash seemed to ricochet off the jewelry store's polished surfaces like a gunshot. Vivian's face went through a series of micro-expressions, confusion, disbelief, then a hardening that suggested she'd decided this was some elaborate bluff. Cash, Vivian repeated, her voice taking on the tone of someone humoring a child's fantasy. For a $45,000 bracelet. Is there a problem with cash transactions at Sterling Fine Jewelry? Zara asked, pulling her phone from her purse with deliberate slowness. Perhaps I should speak with your corporate office about your payment policies. The threat landed exactly where Zara intended. Vivian's eyes widened slightly. Corporate complaints were career killers in retail, and they both knew it. But instead of backing down, Vivian doubled down on her assumptions, her pride and prejudice forming an impenetrable wall around her judgment. Of course we accept cash, Vivian said quickly, then added with a patronizing smile, when customers actually have it. Look, sweetheart, I appreciate whatever game you're playing, but I wasn't born yesterday. You can't just walk in here and... Vivian. The voice came from behind the main counter, sharp with warning. A distinguished black man in an impeccably tailored suit had emerged from the back office, his expression thunderous. Is there a problem here? This was Raymond Sterling, the store's owner, and Vivian's heart sank as she realized her confrontation had drawn his attention. Raymond had built Sterling Fine Jewelry from a single location to a 5-store empire, and he had absolutely zero tolerance for anything that could damage his reputation. Mr. Sterling, Vivian said, her voice suddenly higher, more strained. I was just helping this customer understand our selection process. I heard enough, Raymond cut her off, his gaze moving between Vivian and Zara with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading people and situations. Ma'am, I apologize for any confusion. How may we properly assist you today? Zara felt a moment of relief. Finally, someone treating her like a human being. But Vivian, perhaps sensing her authority slipping away, made a desperate play to maintain control of the narrative. Mr. Sterling, I was just explaining our premium collection policies, Vivian interjected, her voice taking on a falsely professional tone. This customer was interested in pieces that require extensive qualification processes. I was trying to guide her toward more suitable options. What would you do if you witnessed this scene unfolding in front of you? Would you speak up or stay silent? Share your thoughts below. The phrase qualification processes hung in the air like smog. Raymond's jaw tightened. There were no such policies at his stores, and they all knew it. But Vivian was banking on the assumption that he'd support his manager over a random customer, especially if she could make her actions sound like standard business practice. Qualification processes, Raymond repeated slowly, his voice dangerous. Remind me, Vivian, what exactly do these processes entail? Vivian realized she'd painted herself into a corner, but panic made her double down harder. Well, obviously we need to ensure customers can actually afford our premium pieces before we invest time in showing them. It's just good business sense. We can't have people handling merchandise they can't purchase. The store had gone completely silent now. Other customers had stopped all pretense of shopping and were openly watching the drama unfold. Zara stood perfectly still in the center of it all, watching Vivian dig her own grave with every word. I see, Raymond said, his tone deadly calm. And you determined this customer couldn't afford our merchandise. How, exactly? The question was a trap, and somewhere in her panicking mind, Vivian knew it. But she was too deep in her own narrative to find a way out that didn't involve admitting she'd profiled Zara based on nothing but her race and her deliberately casual appearance. I mean, look at her, Vivian said, gesturing wildly at Zara. She's dressed like she shops at Target. Her bag is obviously secondhand. She's asking about $45,000 bracelets like she's ordering coffee. I was trying to save us all some time and embarrassment. The words tumbled out faster now, Vivian's desperation making her say things that should have stayed locked in her head. Around the store, customers began pulling out phones, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. She probably doesn't even have a real job, Vivian continued, her voice rising. She's probably just in here for Instagram photos, or because she's bored. I've seen it 100 times. People who think they can just wander into places like this and waste our time pretending they belong here. The word belong landed like a physical blow. Zara felt something cold and final settle in her chest. She'd given Vivian multiple opportunities to retreat, multiple chances to choose dignity over destruction. But some people, she'd learned over the years, were so committed to their prejudices that they'd ride them straight into disaster. Raymond's face had gone ashen. In 20 years of business, he'd never had an employee so blatantly violate every principle he'd built his company on. But before he could speak, Zara's phone began to ring. The sound cut through the tension like a bell. Zara glanced at the screen and saw Jonathan's photo, a candid shot from their honeymoon, laughing as he tried to take a selfie while she kissed his cheek. For a moment, her expression softened with pure love. "Excuse me," she said quietly, stepping slightly away from the group. "I need to take this." She swiped to answer, and Jonathan's warm voice filled her ear. "Hey beautiful, how's the anniversary shopping going? Find anything perfect yet?" The tenderness in his voice, the casual assumption that she was being treated with respect and kindness, nearly broke something inside her. She glanced back at Vivian, who was watching with narrowed eyes, probably assuming this was all part of some elaborate performance. "It's been educational," Zara said carefully, not wanting to worry him during his important meetings. "The service here is quite memorable." Good memorable or bad memorable? Jonathan knew his wife's diplomatic language well enough to catch the subtext. Zara looked directly at Vivian as she answered. "Let's just say I'm learning a lot about people's assumptions today." There was a pause on Jonathan's end, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, protective, alert. "Zara, are you okay? Do you need me to come down there?" "No, darling. I can handle this. But you might want to clear your schedule for dinner tonight. I have a feeling I'll have quite a story to tell you. As Zara ended her call with Jonathan, the atmosphere in Sterling Fine Jewelry had shifted from uncomfortable tension to something approaching a powder keg. Raymond Sterling stood frozen between his failing manager and a situation that could destroy his business reputation with a single social media post. Other customers had formed a loose semicircle around the unfolding drama, phones discreetly recording what was clearly becoming a defining moment. Mrs. Raymond began, realizing he didn't even know Zara's name after watching his employee humiliate her for the past 10 minutes. Rivera, Zara supplied calmly. Zara Rivera. Vivian's eyes narrowed further. The name meant nothing to her, but she'd noticed the brief softening in Zara's expression during the phone call, the way her voice had carried genuine affection. It only reinforced Vivian's assumption that this was all performance, probably calling some boyfriend to pick her up after her charade had been exposed. Mrs. Rivera, Raymond continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone trying to salvage an impossible situation, I want to personally apologize for. Actually, Zara interrupted gently, before we continue, I'm curious about something. She turned to address Vivian directly. You mentioned qualification processes. I'd like to understand them better. What exactly would someone need to prove they belong in your store? It was a lawyer's question, precise, loaded, designed to elicit information that could be used later. But Vivian, still drunk on her own righteousness and convinced she was protecting her store from a fraud, took the bait completely. Well, obviously we'd need to see identification, proof of income, credit verification, Vivian said, warming to her theme. Maybe references from other high-end establishments. We're not running a charity here. We're running a business that serves serious collectors and established clients. Raymond's face went from ashen to grey. There were no such policies at Sterling Fine Jewelry, and every word out of Vivian's mouth was creating legal liability that could sink his company. Interesting, Zara said thoughtfully. And are these policies applied to all customers equally? The question hung in the air like a judicial trap. Around them, the other customers leaned in closer. Everyone could sense they were witnessing something significant, though few understood the full implications yet. Of course they are, Vivian snapped, though her voice carried less confidence now. We don't discriminate. We just use common sense. Common sense, Zara repeated. Based on what criteria? Vivian gestured vaguely at Zara again, but this time with less certainty. Something in Zara's calm questioning was making her nervous, though she couldn't quite identify why. Have you ever seen someone dig themselves deeper into trouble by refusing to stop talking? What do you think drives people to double down, even when they know they're wrong? Drop your thoughts below. Look, Vivian said, trying to regain her footing. I've been in retail for 20 years. I know how to read people. I know who can afford what. And I know when someone's wasting my time. Your time, Zara said softly. I see. And how much of your time, exactly, have I wasted by asking to see a tennis bracelet? The question was so simple, so reasonable, that it caught Vivian off guard. She realized she'd been talking for 15 minutes about why she couldn't show Zara a piece of jewelry that would have taken 30 seconds to display. That's not the point, Vivian said weakly. Then what is the point? Zara asked. Help me understand. Before Vivian could answer, the store's front door chimed again, and a new customer entered. An impeccably dressed older woman carrying a Hermes bag that probably cost more than Vivian's monthly salary. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned about her right to exist in any space. Oh, wonderful, the woman said brightly, approaching the group. I heard voices and hoped you might still be open for consultations. I'm looking for something special for my daughter's wedding. Raymond immediately shifted into professional mode, grateful for the interruption. Of course, Mrs. Blackwell. Catherine Blackwell. The name carried weight in the city's social circles. Old money, charitable foundations, the kind of customer every high-end retailer courted. But Catherine's attention had been caught by something else. Her sharp eyes had taken in the tense tableau, the watching crowd, the barely contained hostility radiating from Vivian toward Zora. "Is everything all right here?" Catherine asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her questions answered. "Just a small misunderstanding," Raymond said quickly, shooting a warning look at Vivian. But Catherine was studying Zora with interest, taking in her composed posture, her elegant bearing, the quality of her simple jewelry. Catherine had spent 73 years in society circles, and she developed an eye for real class versus mere pretension. This young woman radiated the quiet confidence that came from genuine security, not the desperate performance of someone trying to prove themselves. "A misunderstanding about what?" Catherine asked pointedly. Vivian, sensing an ally in someone who clearly belonged in the store's target demographic, seized the opportunity to validate her actions. "I was just explaining to this customer about our premium collection policies," Vivian said, straightening her shoulders. "We have certain standards we maintain to protect our established clientele." Catherine's expression grew arctic. She'd heard that tone before, the barely concealed prejudice of people who thought they could hide their bigotry behind business policies. As someone who'd spent decades fighting for civil rights through her foundation work, she recognized it immediately. "Premium collection policies," Catherine repeated, her voice dangerous. "How fascinating. And what do these policies entail?" She looked directly at Zora as she asked the question, her meaning clear. "I see what's happening here, and I'm not going to let it stand." Zora felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected ally, but also a weary recognition of the pattern. It often took the intervention of someone who looked like Catherine to make people like Vivian reconsider their behavior. "Apparently," Zora said quietly, "they involve extensive qualification processes to determine whether someone deserves to see certain merchandise." Catherine's eyebrows rose. "Qualification processes? Based on what criteria?" The question was asked with the razor-sharp precision of someone who'd spent decades deposing witnesses in boardrooms and courtrooms. Vivian found herself trapped between two women who clearly knew how to dissect prejudice with surgical precision. We just need to ensure. Obviously we can't." Vivian stammered, finally beginning to realize she'd walked into something far more dangerous than she'd anticipated. "Obviously what?" Catherine asked pleasantly, her tone carrying the deceptive warmth of a predator circling wounded prey. In that moment, as the store's elegant lighting cast sharp shadows across their faces, and the weight of unspoken accusations filled the perfumed air, Vivian Chambers finally understood that she'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. But understanding came too late. The wheels of consequence were already in motion, and there would be no stopping them now. The silence stretched taut as a wire between the three women, each representing a different facet of power and prejudice. Catherine Blackwell studied Vivian with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades dismantling institutionalized discrimination, while Zora remained perfectly still, watching the dynamics shift around her like pieces on a chessboard. "I'm waiting for an answer," Catherine said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had made corporate executives squirm in foundation board meetings. "What criteria do you use for these qualification processes?" Before Vivian could respond, Raymond Sterling stepped forward, desperation evident in his voice. "Mrs. Blackwell, please. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Vivian was just. "No," Catherine cut him off sharply. "Let her speak for herself. I'm genuinely curious about the policies of a store I've been recommending to friends for years." The weight of that statement hit Raymond like a physical blow. Catherine Blackwell's endorsements had brought him thousands of dollars in business from the city's elite circles. Her disapproval could destroy everything he'd built. Vivian looked around wildly, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of her situation. The other customers were still recording. Raymond looked like he might faint, and she was trapped between two women who clearly knew exactly what game was being played here. There are no formal policies," Vivian admitted reluctantly. "I just use my professional judgment to—" "Your professional judgment," Catherine interrupted. Based on what? This young woman's appearance? Her race, perhaps? The word hung in the air like an accusation made flesh. Several customers gasped audibly, and Raymond actually took a step backward as if he'd been struck. "I'm not racist," Vivian said quickly, the defensive words tumbling out with practiced ease. "I have friends who are. I mean, I don't see color. I just—" "Oh, spare me," Catherine said with withering contempt. "I've heard that particular song before. Usually right before someone says something spectacularly bigoted." Zara watched the exchange with a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. She'd seen this pattern countless times. The desperate backpedaling, the hollow denials, the inevitable claim of colorblindness that somehow always seemed to coincidentally result in discrimination. "Mrs. Blackwell," Zara said quietly, drawing the older woman's attention. "It's all right. This isn't uncommon for me." Something in her tone, the weary acceptance, the resignation of someone who'd fought this battle too many times, made Catherine's expression soften with understanding and harden with rage simultaneously. "Not uncommon," Catherine repeated slowly. "How often does this happen to you, dear?" Zara considered the question seriously. "Depends on the week. Sometimes it's subtle, being followed in stores, having salespeople assume I can't afford things. Sometimes it's more direct, like today." She paused, thinking of all the small humiliations and large injustices that had shaped her life. The law school study group that somehow never had room for her. The corporate retreat where she'd been mistaken for catering staff 3 separate times. The charity gala where someone had complimented her English, not knowing her family had been in America for 4 generations. Have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination while shopping or in public spaces? How did it make you feel? And what would you want others to understand about those experiences? Share your perspective below. "The thing is," Zara continued, her voice carrying the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd learned to navigate a world that often saw her as an intruder, "people like Vivian don't usually see themselves as racist. They think racism is burning crosses and using slurs. They don't recognize the quiet assumptions, the casual dismissals, the way they immediately categorize people based on appearance." Vivian flinched as if she'd been slapped. "That's not—" "I don't." "You don't what?" Zara asked gently. "You don't judge people by their clothes? Their skin color? You don't assume you know their story, their worth, their capabilities based on 30 seconds of observation." The questions weren't accusatory. They were almost clinical, delivered with the precision of a surgeon identifying infected tissue. But they cut deeper than any shouting match could have. Catherine stepped closer to Vivian, her voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more menace than any raised voice could have managed. "Let me tell you something about assumptions, Miss Chambers. I spent 40 years as a federal prosecutor before I inherited my family's foundation. I've seen every form of discrimination there is, and I've learned to recognize the signs. What you did here today wasn't customer service. It was profiling, pure and simple." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But here's what you don't know, what your narrow worldview prevented you from seeing. This young woman you've been treating like an unwelcome intruder? Her husband just donated $2 million to my literacy foundation last month. Jonathan Rivera. Perhaps you've heard of Rivera Technologies? The company that's revolutionizing artificial intelligence and employing half the tech workers in this city." The blood drained from Vivian's face as the name finally registered. Rivera Technologies was constantly in the business news, its young CEO featured on magazine covers as one of the most innovative minds of his generation. The company's headquarters occupied 3 downtown blocks and employed over 10,000 people. "That's impossible," Vivian whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. "Is it?" Catherine asked pleasantly. "Because the impossible seems to be your specialty today. Like assuming a successful attorney. Yes, I can spot legal training from across a room. Couldn't possibly afford a tennis bracelet because she had the audacity to dress comfortably while shopping." Raymond Sterling made a sound like a deflating balloon. If Catherine Blackwell was right, and she was never wrong about these things, then Vivian hadn't just insulted a random customer. She'd humiliated the wife of one of the city's most powerful business leaders. Zara pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo from last month's charity gala, where she and Jonathan had presented the Literacy Foundation check. She showed it to Catherine, who nodded grimly. "That's the one," Catherine confirmed, then turned the phone so Raymond and Vivian could see the image of Zara in an elegant evening gown, standing beside Jonathan as they posed with the oversized ceremonial check. Vivian stared at the photo like it was evidence of her own execution, which in a professional sense, it probably was. "Now then," Catherine said, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who'd just checkmated their opponent. "Shall we discuss those qualification processes again? Or would you prefer to show Mrs. Rivera the tennis bracelet she asked to see 20 minutes ago?" The revelation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Vivian stared at the photo on Zara's phone. The elegant woman in the flowing midnight blue gown bore little resemblance to the casually dressed customer she'd spent the last half hour humiliating. Yet there was no denying they were the same person. The confident smile, the graceful posture, the unmistakable radiance of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. Vivian's voice cracked, the word emerging as barely more than a whisper. For the first time since this confrontation began, she seemed to truly see Zara, not as a stereotype or assumption, but as an actual human being she'd wounded with her prejudice. Raymond Sterling looked like he might be physically ill. His hands shook slightly as he processed the magnitude of what had just unfolded in his store. Not only had his manager racially profiled a customer, but that customer happened to be married to one of the city's most influential entrepreneurs. The potential lawsuits, the media coverage, the destruction of his reputation, it all flashed before his eyes like a career-ending slideshow. Catherine Blackwell watched the scene unfold with the satisfaction of someone who'd just delivered a masterclass in consequences. But as she observed Vivian's complete devastation, something unexpected stirred in her chest. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She'd been where Vivian was now, forced to confront the ugly truths about herself that she'd spent years denying. Zara looked at Vivian's stricken face and felt something shift inside her own chest. The righteous anger was still there, the justified fury at being treated like something less than human. But underneath it, she recognized something else. The terrible moment when someone realizes they've become everything they never wanted to be. "Vivian," Zara said softly, causing the manager to look up with red-rimmed eyes. "May I ask you something personal?" Vivian nodded mutely, seemingly beyond the capacity for coherent speech. "What happened to you?" Zara's voice carried genuine curiosity now, not accusation. "I don't think you woke up this morning planning to humiliate a stranger. So what brought you to this moment?" The question was so unexpected, so filled with human concern rather than condemnation, that it broke something inside Vivian. Tears began to flow freely down her cheeks, carrying with them 20 years of accumulated bitterness and disappointment. "I don't know," Vivian whispered, then immediately contradicted herself. "No, that's not true. I do know. I've been angry for so long. I forgot what it felt like not to be angry." Catherine moved closer, her expression softening. She'd spent decades fighting institutional racism, but she'd also learned that sustainable change came from understanding, not just condemnation. "Angry at what?" Catherine asked gently. Vivian wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "At everything. My ex-husband who left me for someone half my age. The customers who treat me like I'm invisible. The life I thought I'd have that never materialized. The feeling that everyone else got some instruction manual for success that I never received." She paused, looking around the store that had represented her small kingdom of authority. "I worked so hard to get here," Vivian continued, her voice breaking. "I started as a part-time sales girl 20 years ago, worked nights and weekends, gave up having children because Thomas said we needed to focus on building our careers first. I clawed my way up to manager, and for what? So I could watch younger, prettier women come in here, wearing clothes that cost more than I make in a month, living lives I'll never have. How do you think past hurts and disappointments can change someone's behavior toward others? Have you ever caught yourself taking out frustrations on innocent people? Share your thoughts below. Zara felt her anger begin to transform into something more complex. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding. She'd seen this pattern before in her legal practice. The way pain could metastasize into cruelty. The way people who felt powerless often tried to exert control over others. I'm not excusing what you did, Zara said clearly. What happened here was wrong, and it was harmful. But I recognize pain when I see it. She stepped closer to Vivian, close enough that her next words were meant only for her. You want to know the truth? I almost didn't come in here today. I stood outside for 5 minutes, steeling myself for exactly this kind of interaction. Because it happens everywhere, Vivian. Restaurants, hotels, stores, airports. There's always someone who looks at me and sees a threat or an imposter, or just less than. Vivian's face crumpled with the weight of that revelation. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so terribly sorry. I know you are, Zara said quietly. But sorry doesn't erase the damage. The other customers who witnessed this, the employees who heard every word, they all just learned that it's acceptable to treat people differently based on assumptions. Some of them will remember this moment and think it's normal. Catherine stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Vivian's shoulder. I want to tell you something, Vivian. Something I learned the hard way, many years ago. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I was about your age when I realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. I was so focused on climbing the ladder, so determined to prove I belonged in spaces dominated by men, that I'd started pulling up the ladder behind me. I was harder on other women, more critical, more demanding, because I thought that's what it took to be taken seriously. Vivian looked up, surprise flickering through her tears. It took a very patient colleague to help me understand that my pain was making me cruel, that my fight for respect had turned into a battle against anyone I perceived as having it easier than I did. Catherine's voice grew stronger, more certain. The thing about pain, Vivian, is that it either breaks you open or closes you off. Today, you have a choice about which direction you go from here. Raymond, who had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, finally found his voice. Vivian, you're fired. Effective immediately. Please clear out your office. Wait, Zara said, surprising everyone, including herself. Mr. Sterling, may I make a suggestion? She looked at Vivian, who was staring at her with desperate hope. What if, instead of firing her, you required her to complete unconscious bias training? Partner with Catherine's foundation, maybe create a program that helps other retailers recognize and address these issues. Vivian's eyes widened. You would, after what I did to you, you would. I would give you a chance to turn this into something meaningful, Zara said firmly. But only if you're genuinely committed to change. Real change, not just damage control. For the first time in months, Vivian felt something other than anger or despair. She felt the faintest glimmer of hope, not for redemption, exactly, but for the possibility of becoming someone better than who she'd been in this moment. Yes, she whispered, then stronger. Yes. I want to change. I need to change. Catherine smiled, recognizing the moment when someone chooses growth over defensiveness. Then let's talk about what that actually looks like, she said. Because words are easy. Actions are what matter. The fragile moment of connection shattered like crystal hitting concrete when the store's front door burst open with enough force to make the entrance bell scream rather than chime. A tall man in an expensive suit stormed in, his face flushed with rage, and his eyes scanning the store until they locked onto the group gathered near the tennis bracelet display. What the hell is going on here? Thomas Chambers demanded, his voice carrying the entitled fury of someone accustomed to having his problems solved immediately. I got 3 phone calls telling me my ex-wife is having some kind of public breakdown at a jewelry store. Vivian's face went ashen. The small flame of hope that had begun to kindle in her chest was instantly extinguished by the familiar weight of shame and and humiliation. Thomas looked exactly as she remembered. Silver-haired, commanding, still handsome in the way that men with money and confidence often were. But his expression held the same contempt she'd grown accustomed to during the final years of their marriage. "Thomas," she whispered, instinctively stepping backward. "You don't need to be here. This isn't what? Isn't my business." His laugh was harsh, designed to cut. "When my name gets dragged through social media because my crazy ex-wife can't handle a simple retail job, yeah, it becomes my business." He pulled out his phone and waved it like evidence in a trial. "Do you have any idea what's being posted about you right now? Racist store manager humiliated at Sterling Jewelry. Manager gets owned after profiling customer. The videos are going viral, Vivian." Viral. The words hit like physical blows. Zara felt her stomach turn as she realized that what had felt like a private moment of potential redemption had been broadcasting to the internet the entire time. She glanced around and noticed several customers still had their phones out, recording Thomas's tirade with the same hungry interest they'd shown for the original confrontation. Catherine stepped forward, her voice carrying authority. "Sir, I think you need to lower your voice and consider." "Consider what?" Thomas spun toward her, his eyes wild. "Consider that my professional reputation is being destroyed because I made the mistake of marrying someone who can't control herself in public. Consider that my clients are probably seeing this right now and wondering if I'm as much of a disaster as my ex-wife." The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. Vivian seemed to physically shrink with each word, all the progress of the last few minutes evaporating under the weight of his public humiliation. "Thomas, please," Vivian begged, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this here." "Do what?" "Tell the truth." He turned back to face the gathering crowd, his voice rising. "You want to know why this happened? Because Vivian never learned to know her place. She always thought she was smarter than she was, more important than she was. She couldn't accept that some people are just ordinary. Have you ever witnessed someone being torn down by someone who was supposed to love them? How do you think public humiliation affects a person's ability to grow and change? Let us know your thoughts." Zara watched in horror as Vivian's face crumpled, not with tears this time, but with something worse, complete defeat. The woman who had been showing the first signs of genuine remorse and growth was being systematically destroyed by someone who was supposed to care about her well-being. "That's enough," Zara said sharply, her lawyer's voice cutting through Thomas's rant. "Whatever issues you have with your ex-wife, this is neither the time nor the place." Thomas turned his attention to her with the dismissive glance he'd perfected in boardrooms. "And you are? Someone who was trying to have a conversation about growth and redemption until you decided to turn this into a public execution. Growth and redemption?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Lady, you don't know Vivian. She's been playing the victim card for 30 years. Poor little girl from the wrong side of town. Had to work twice as hard. Nobody understands her struggle. It's all bullshit designed to justify why she never achieved anything meaningful." The words seemed to drain all remaining life from Vivian's face. She looked at Zara with eyes full of desperate apology. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. He's right. I am just ordinary. I don't deserve forgiveness or second chances. I don't deserve anything." "Don't say that," Zara began, but Vivian was already moving toward the store's exit, pushing past Thomas with the broken stride of someone fleeing their own destruction. "Vivian, wait," Catherine called out, but it was too late. The door slammed behind her, leaving an awful silence in her wake. Thomas straightened his tie with smug satisfaction. "Well, that's settled. She won't be bothering anyone here again." Raymond Sterling found his voice, though it shook with barely contained fury. "Get out of my store. Right now." "Excuse me?" "I said get out, before I have you arrested for harassment and disturbing the peace." Thomas looked around the store, finally seeming to register the hostile stares of everyone present. His moment of triumph was curdling into something uglier as he realized he'd just publicly destroyed a woman who was already down. "This isn't over," he said, but his bluster had deflated. He strode toward the exit, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits, but everyone could hear the hollow ring of empty threats. The store fell into stunned silence after his departure. Zara stared at the door where Vivian had fled, feeling like she'd just watched someone drown while she stood on the shore. "I have to find her," she said quietly. Catherine nodded grimly. "We all do. That man just undid everything we were trying to build." Raymond looked around his store, at the customers still recording, at the shattered remains of what should have been a simple business transaction, at the viral disaster that would probably define his business for years to come. "Maybe some people can't be saved," he said wearily. "That's not true," Zara said fiercely, surprising herself with the intensity of her conviction. "Everyone deserves the chance to be better than their worst moment. But first, we have to find her before she does something irreversible." The weight of that possibility settled over them like a shroud. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware that somewhere in its sprawling expanse, a woman was carrying the unbearable weight of public humiliation and private despair. Time was running out for second chances. The silence in sterling fine jewelry felt heavy as a funeral shroud. Zara stood frozen in the center of the store, staring at the door through which Vivian had fled, while around her the other customers slowly began to disperse, their phones full of footage that would soon flood social media with hashtags about justice served and karma delivered. But justice, Zara realized with growing unease, wasn't supposed to feel this hollow. "I need to go after her," she said, already reaching for her purse. Catherine caught her arm gently. "Dear, that woman just spent 30 minutes humiliating you based purely on the color of your skin. You don't owe her anything." "Don't I?" Zara turned to face the older woman, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Catherine, you saw what I saw in there." She was changing. For the first time, she was actually seeing me as a human being, recognizing her own prejudice. And then her voice broke as she remembered the systematic way Thomas had torn Vivian apart, each word calculated to destroy not just her dignity, but her hope. "That man knew exactly what he was doing," Zara continued, her voice growing stronger. "He saw his ex-wife on the verge of growth, of becoming someone better, and he couldn't stand it. He had to remind her, and everyone watching, that she was worthless." Raymond Sterling looked up from where he'd been staring at his phone, watching the view counts climb on videos titled, "Racist Manager Gets Destroyed," and "Karen Gets What She Deserves." "Mrs. Rivera," he said carefully, "I understand your compassion, but Vivian made her choices today. No one forced her to profile you, to humiliate you in front of my other customers. Maybe this is just consequences." Zara felt a flash of the same anger she'd experienced earlier, but this time it was directed at everyone who was ready to write Vivian off as irredeemable. "Consequences," she repeated slowly. "You know what the consequence of this will be? Vivian will go home tonight convinced she's exactly as worthless as her ex-husband said she was. She'll look at those videos and see confirmation that she's beyond redemption. And tomorrow, when she wakes up, she'll have two choices. Try to change despite having been publicly destroyed, or decide that if she's going to be labeled a monster anyway, she might as well become one." The truth of that statement settled over the group like a cold wind. Catherine, who had spent decades in criminal justice, knew exactly how trauma and public shaming could drive people deeper into destructive patterns rather than lifting them out. "But what can we do?" Raymond asked helplessly. "She's gone. She won't answer her phone. I've tried calling 3 times already." Zara pulled out her own phone and scrolled to her contacts, stopping at a name that made her heart ache with memory. Dr. Amanda Washington, crisis counselor, the woman who had talked Zara through her darkest moments during law school, when the weight of constant microaggressions and imposter syndrome had nearly broken her. "I know someone," she said quietly. "Someone who specializes in helping people who've hit rock bottom." She dialed the number, praying Amanda would answer despite the late hour. After 3 rings, a familiar warm voice came through. "Zara? Honey, it's been months. How are you?" "Amanda, I need your help. There's a woman. She made some terrible choices today, said some awful things to me. But now she's in crisis, and I'm worried about what she might do. There was a pause, then Amanda's professional voice replaced the casual warmth. Tell me what happened. Zara quickly outlined the afternoon's events, from Vivian's initial profiling through the moment of connection to Thomas's devastating public destruction of his ex-wife. As she spoke, she could hear Amanda taking notes. And you want to help her because? Amanda asked when Zara finished. What would you do in Zara's position? When someone has hurt you but is clearly in pain, do you believe in extending compassion even when it's not deserved? Share your perspective below. Because I saw her, Amanda. For those few minutes, I saw who she could be underneath all that pain and prejudice. And because? Zara paused, struggling to find the right words. Because I know what it's like to be told you're not enough. I know what it's like to have people assume the worst about you based on surface judgments. The difference is, I had people who loved me, who reminded me of my worth when I forgot. She has no one. Zara, Amanda said gently, you can't save everyone. Sometimes people have to save themselves. I'm not trying to save her, Zara replied firmly. I'm trying to give her the same chance that was given to me. The chance to be better than her worst moment. There was a long pause, then Amanda sighed. Okay, give me her information. I'll reach out, see if she's willing to talk. But Zara, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she won't take the help. Some people are too deep in their own pain to accept a ladder out. I know, but I have to try. After ending the call, Zara found Catherine and Raymond watching her with expressions mixing admiration and concern. You really think she can change? Catherine asked. I think everyone deserves the chance to try, Zara said simply. The question is whether she'll choose to take it. Outside the jewelry store, the city hummed with its usual evening energy. Somewhere in that maze of lights and lives, Vivian Chambers sat alone in her car in an empty parking lot, staring at her phone as notification after notification rolled in. Strangers dissecting her worst moment, friends from high school commenting with shock and disappointment, former co-workers sharing the videos with laugh cry emojis. Her finger hovered over Thomas's contact information. She could call him, let him finish what he'd started in the store. Or she could drive home to her empty apartment and let the weight of public humiliation crush whatever remained of her spirit. But then her phone buzzed with an unknown number, and a text message appeared that would change the trajectory of her evening, and possibly her life. Ms. Chambers, my name is Dr. Amanda Washington. I'm a counselor, and I've been asked to reach out by someone who believes you deserve a chance to heal and grow. I'm here if you're ready to talk. No judgment, just conversation. Reply if interested. Vivian stared at the message for a long time, tears falling onto her phone screen. Someone, probably that woman she'd humiliated, had cared enough to arrange help for her. Even after everything. Her finger trembled as she typed her response. I don't know if I can be saved. The reply came almost instantly. You don't have to be saved. You just have to be willing to begin. For the first time in hours, Vivian Chambers allowed herself to breathe. 3 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the newly renovated sterling fine jewelry, casting the same rainbow prisms across the display cases. But everything else had changed. Where once there had been an atmosphere of exclusivity and judgment, there was now warmth and genuine welcome. A small plaque near the entrance read, Sterling Fine Jewelry, a partner in the Blackwell Foundation's Inclusive Business Initiative. Zara Rivera pushed through the front door, the familiar chime now carrying memories of transformation rather than trauma. She wore the same casual elegance as before, well-fitted jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, but her bearing carried a different quality now, the confidence of someone who had chosen compassion over retribution and watched it bloom into something beautiful. Mrs. Rivera. The voice came from behind the main counter, bright with genuine enthusiasm. Vivian Chambers looked up from where she was carefully arranging a new collection. Her appearance transformed, but not artificially so. Her hair was softer, her makeup more natural, and her eyes, once hard with defensive bitterness, now held something that could only be called peace. "Vivian," Zara said warmly, approaching the counter. "How are the new training sessions going?" "Beyond anything I could have imagined," Vivian replied, her voice carrying wonder at her own words. "Yesterday, we had 15 retail managers from across the city attend the unconscious bias workshop. And Zara, I watched them have the same realizations I did, saw them recognize their own blind spots." She paused, arranging a delicate necklace with careful reverence. "One woman pulled me aside afterward and thanked me. She said hearing my story helped her understand how pain can make us cruel without us even realizing it. She's implementing new training protocols at her store this week." Zara felt that familiar warmth in her chest, the deep satisfaction of watching someone transform their worst moment into their greatest contribution. "And how are you feeling about everything?" Vivian's smile was radiant, unmarked by the bitterness that had once defined her features. "I feel like I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be. Not perfect. Dr. Washington reminds me regularly that growth is a process, not a destination. But worthy. For the first time in years, I feel worthy of respect and capable of giving it." The door chimed again, and Catherine Blackwell entered, her designer bag replaced today with a simple tote filled with foundation materials. She'd become a regular presence at Sterling, working with Raymond to develop what was becoming a model program for inclusive retail practices. "Zara, perfect timing," Catherine said, embracing her warmly. "I wanted to show you the latest enrollment numbers for our program." She pulled out a tablet displaying impressive statistics. Over 200 businesses had signed up for the unconscious bias training, and customer satisfaction scores across participating stores had increased by an average of 30%. "More importantly," Catherine continued, "we've had 12 different retailers report that the training helped them identify and address discriminatory practices they didn't even know they had. Real change, measurable change. How do you think one person's willingness to extend compassion can create ripple effects throughout a community? Have you ever seen small acts of grace lead to bigger transformations? Share your experiences below."
Vivian looked up from her work, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "Zara, I need to ask you something I've wondered about for months." "Of course. Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "After everything I said to you, everything I put you through, why did you help me? Why didn't you just let me destroy myself?" Zara considered the question seriously, remembering that awful afternoon and the choice that had seemed so clear in the moment, but had required such courage to act upon. "Because I recognized something in your eyes," she said finally. "The same thing I'd seen in my own mirror during the hardest parts of law school, when I was convinced I didn't belong anywhere and never would. Pain can make us lash out, but it doesn't have to define us." She moved closer to the counter, her voice growing softer. "But also because someone once told me that love, real love, isn't just about the people who are easy to love. It's about extending grace to people who are struggling to find their way back to their own humanity. My grandmother used to say that we're all walking each other home, and sometimes that means carrying someone who can't walk on their own." Tears gathered in Vivian's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than pain. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was, and she would have loved seeing what you've become." The door chimed one final time, and Jonathan Rivera entered, his presence immediately transforming Zara's expression into pure radiance. Even after 5.5 years of marriage, her face still lit up like sunrise when she saw him. "Sorry I'm late," he said, crossing quickly to kiss his wife's cheek. "The board meeting ran long, but I have news that couldn't wait." He turned to address the small group, his excitement barely contained. "Rivera Technologies just received approval for our new corporate social responsibility initiative. We're partnering with the Blackwell Foundation to implement inclusive practices training across all our partner vendors and suppliers. Vivian, if you're interested, we'd like you to lead the program." The offer hung in the air like a gift too precious to be real. Vivian's hands trembled as she processed what Jonathan was saying, Not just a job, but a calling, a way to transform her painful experience into meaningful change on a scale she'd never imagined possible. She began, then stopped, overwhelmed. Think about it, Jonathan said gently. There's no pressure, but watching what you've accomplished here, seeing the impact of your work with Catherine, we believe you could help change how business gets done in this entire city. Zara reached across the counter and took Vivian's hands in hers, completing a circle that had begun with animosity and judgment, but had transformed into something approaching sisterhood. This is what love looks like, she said quietly, her words meant for Vivian but carrying truth for everyone present. Not the easy kind that comes naturally, but the hard kind that chooses to see possibility where others see only failure. The kind that believes in second chances and third chances, and as many chances as it takes for someone to find their way home to themselves. Vivian squeezed Zara's hands, her voice steady with newfound purpose. Then yes to the job, yes to the work, yes to becoming someone worthy of the grace I've been given. Outside the jewelry store, the city continued its eternal dance of humanity. People hurting and healing, failing and rising, learning to see each other not as stereotypes or assumptions, but as fellow travelers on the long journey toward understanding. And in one small corner of that vast tapestry, love had indeed triumphed, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the quiet, revolutionary act of choosing compassion over condemnation. The tennis bracelet that had started it all still gleamed in its display case, but it was no longer the most valuable thing in the store. That honor belonged to something much more precious, the proof that even in a world filled with division and prejudice, love could still have the last word.